Do you ever stop to think about the tools you use every day? The chipped screwdriver, the creaking wrench, the frayed hammer grip? They're just objects, right? Inanimate, lifeless, until they aren't. Until they start whispering secrets you'd rather not know. It was a late September afternoon when I found myself scouring the job boards in the local library. I was a maintenance worker by trade, but years of wear and tear on both my body and reputation had left me with little to work with. Divorce, custody battles, and the creeping shadow of debt had pushed me to the brink. Then, tucked away between two outdated listings, I saw it. Maintenance worker needed, Dollar General, Atlanta suburbs, $25 per hour, immediate start. The pay wasn't bad, and it wasn't like I had options lining up. So, I called the number, and before the end of the day, I was hired. Be there by 10 p.m. sharp, the store manager, a woman with a strangely monotonous voice, told me over the phone. Night shift? Fine by me, I replied. What she didn't say, and what I'd come to regret not asking, was why the job paid so well and why the store needed a maintenance worker in the dead of night. I arrived at the Dollar General at 9:45 p.m. sharp. The store stood in eerie contrast to its suburban surroundings. Its windows were smeared with years of neglect, and the fluorescent lights inside flickered like a dying heartbeat. The manager met me at the entrance. She introduced herself as Ms. Gray, a name as colorless as her demeanor. Your locker's in the back, she said. Your tools are inside. Stick to the checklist, and you'll be fine. Checklist? I raised an eyebrow but didn't press. The locker was old, its metal exterior dented and rusted. Inside, I found a toolbox, and resting on top was a screwdriver that looked like it had been plucked from a salvage yard. Its edges were rusted, and the handle felt oddly warm to the touch. The night started uneventfully enough, tightening loose screws on shelving units, fixing a leaky faucet in the staff bathroom. But everything changed when I approached the freezer in the back. It was an old industrial unit, humming loudly like it was on its last legs. As I pried open the panel to check the coils, I accidentally tapped the screwdriver against the freezer's metal. That's when I saw them. Words scrawled across the freezer door in jagged, glowing letters. Rule 1. Do not touch the freezer with bare hands after midnight. Rule 2. If the frost forms in spirals, leave immediately. Rule 3. Never open the freezer without wearing gloves. Rule 4. Avoid looking directly at the ice. Rule 5. Do not whistle near the freezer. Rule 6. If you hear knocking, do not respond. The screwdriver trembled in my hand, and for a brief moment, I could have sworn I felt something cold and slimy brush against my arm. I jerked back and stumbled, the words disappearing as quickly as they'd appeared. The freezer loomed in the back corner of the store like a slumbering beast. Its hum was loud and uneven, a mechanical growl that sent vibrations through the floor. The rules I had just seen wouldn't leave my mind. I ran my gloved fingers over the screwdriver's rusted edge, wondering if the tool was playing tricks on me. The store manager hadn't mentioned anything about rules or warnings. Was this some bizarre prank left by a former employee? I shook my head, trying to focus. The checklist Ms. Gray had handed me was clear. Inspect freezer coil for leaks. Adjust defrost timer. Easy enough in theory. I placed my toolbox on the ground, crouched, and began to unscrew the access panel. The rusted bolts squealed in protest as I loosened them one by one. The air around the freezer felt cooler than it should have, biting at my exposed wrists despite the room being relatively warm. As the panel came free, a wave of icy mist spilled out. The coils inside looked ancient, caked in frost that glittered under the flickering light. I grabbed my flashlight and inspected the damage. The frost wasn't uniform. It formed strange patterns, swirls and jagged lines that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Must be an old unit," I muttered, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. Suddenly, the hum of the freezer changed. It was subtle at first, a low whine like a distant whistle carried on the wind. Then it grew louder, a high-pitched keening that made my teeth ache. I stepped back, unsure of what I was hearing. That's when I noticed it, the frost. It was moving. Slowly, impossibly, the spirals of ice began to spread outward, creeping along the metal like veins in shattered glass. Rule 2. If the frost forms in spirals, leave immediately. The words flashed in my mind like a neon warning sign. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my body felt rooted to the spot. The frost crept closer, inch by inch, until it reached the edge of the toolbox I had left too close to the freezer. The metal handle frosted over, and with a loud crack, the plastic casing split open. Tools spilled onto the floor, clattering like gunshots in the silence that followed. I scrambled to pick them up, my breath coming in short gasps. My gloved fingers brushed against the frost-coated metal, and even through the fabric, the cold burned. I yanked my hand back, hissing in pain. The hum of the freezer had returned to normal, but the spirals of frost remained, etched into the steel like some ancient warning. I shoved the tools back into the box, my hands trembling. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. I couldn't stay here. Not like this. I grabbed the panel, hastily screwing it back into place, and retreated to the front of the store. The fluorescent lights above buzzed loudly, their flicker more erratic than before. I slumped against the counter, trying to steady my breathing. The screwdriver was still in my hand, its rusted edges now glinting faintly under the artificial light. It felt heavier than before, almost warm, as though it had absorbed some of the freezer's unnatural energy. I glanced at the clock on the wall. Midnight was still an hour away. I debated leaving, breaking my contract on the first night. But Ms. Gray's monotone voice echoed in my mind. "Stick to the checklist, and you'll be fine." I wasn't fine. And something told me the night was only going to get worse. The rest of the store felt unnaturally quiet as I walked the aisles, toolbox in hand. The rows of goods stood undisturbed, a neat and sterile picture of suburban life. The hum of the freezer had faded into the background, but my skin still prickled with unease. The rules were burned into my mind, especially Rule 2. If the frost forms in spirals, leave immediately. I tried to push it out of my head. Maybe I was imagining things. I had been up since 6 a.m. after all, and exhaustion could make people see strange things. Right? I returned to the front counter to grab a bottle of water. As I twisted the cap, I caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection of the cooler doors. A shadow, long and distorted, slipped between two aisles. I froze, heart pounding. I hadn't seen anyone come into the store. No footsteps, no jingle of the bell above the door. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering. The store's acoustics swallowed the sound, giving back only silence. I reached under the counter and grabbed the flashlight. My hand hovered over the walkie Ms. Gray had given me, but something stopped me from calling her. Would she even believe me? Would she laugh it off as a trick of the light? Or worse, would she say something cryptic like she already knew? The shadow reappeared, this time closer. It moved like smoke, slipping between the shelves without disturbing a single product. I gripped the flashlight tighter, turning it on and aiming the beam into the aisles. "Whoever's there, this isn't funny," I said, trying to sound firm. My voice echoed, thin and hollow. I walked toward the aisle where I had seen the shadow. It was the frozen goods section. The humming grew louder as I approached, the sound vibrating in my chest. The freezer's door handle was frosted over now, and the glass had fogged up. I could barely see inside, but something about it made my stomach churn. And then I saw them. More spirals. Frost spirals, just like before, but this time they weren't on the freezer coil. They were on the inside of the glass, overlapping in intricate patterns that didn't look natural. It was as if someone, or something, had drawn them deliberately. Rule 3. Never touch the frost with your bare hands. I hadn't touched it directly before, but the thought of breaking a rule made my hands sweat. I backed away slowly, careful not to let my reflection in the glass linger too long. The shadow returned, but this time it wasn't alone. Reflected in the glass, I saw more shapes, human silhouettes, but their movements were jerky and unnatural, like marionettes being yanked on strings. My breath caught in my throat. I spun around, expecting to see them standing there, but the aisle was empty, completely empty. The flashlight flickered in my hand, its beam dimming as the batteries began to die. I cursed under my breath, turning back toward the counter. And that's when I saw it. A small puddle of frost spreading across the floor, inching closer to my boots. A single word appeared in the frost, as if etched by an unseen hand. Run. I didn't need another hint. I bolted back to the counter, my pulse racing. The rules hadn't explicitly mentioned this, but it felt like a warning. Something was wrong, and it was only getting worse. By the time I reached the counter, my chest was heaving. I leaned against it, trying to steady my breath. The store felt colder than before, though I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination or if the frost from the freezer was seeping into the air. I glanced toward the aisle where the freezer stood, its faint hum now distorted, sounding more like a low, guttural moan. The walkie Ms. Gray had given me sat on the counter, the static crackling intermittently. I grabbed it and pressed the button. "Ms. Gray, are you there?" I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. No response. The static crackled again before it went silent altogether. Great, I thought. Just great. I told myself to stay calm. I had dealt with eerie things before. A life spent fixing machines in the middle of nowhere had its share of oddities. But this was different. This wasn't just some electrical fault or a misplaced shadow. This felt intentional. The freezer, still humming, drew my attention again. The spirals in the frost had changed, now forming larger, more intricate patterns, almost like runes. I squinted at the frost-covered glass, drawn against my better judgment. The patterns seemed to shift the longer I stared, as though the frost was alive, rearranging itself before my very eyes. A whisper cut through the air. Faint, distant, like the murmur of a crowd in a distant room. "Fix it," the voice said. I froze. The sound hadn't come from the walkie. It was clearer, closer, like someone standing just behind me. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but there was no one there. Just the aisles of neatly stacked canned goods and the eerie glow of fluorescent lights. "Fix it," the voice came again. This time it was louder, more insistent. I turned back to the freezer. The frost on the glass had formed words. "Fix it, or suffer." I backed away, my legs trembling. "What the hell is this?" I muttered. My voice sounded hollow, as though the store itself was swallowing the sound. The shadows in the aisles seemed to grow darker, denser, pressing in on me like a living thing. Then, from inside the freezer, there was a soft tap-tap-tap against the glass. I shone the flashlight at it, but the beam barely penetrated the foggy surface. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a shape pressing against the glass from the inside, as though something, or someone, was trapped in there. "Tom," the whispering voice called, drawing out my name like a snake's hiss. I dropped the flashlight, the beam spinning wildly across the floor as it clattered against the tiles. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled backward, colliding with a display rack of candy bars. The sound of falling wrappers brought me back to my senses. I bent down to pick up the flashlight, and as I did, I saw the frost creeping along the floor, the spirals now etched into the tiles. Rule 4. Never leave the freezer door open for more than 30 seconds. But I hadn't opened it. I hadn't even touched it. Why was the frost spreading? I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. I needed to fix the freezer, whatever that meant. But every instinct told me to stay far away from it. The air grew colder with each passing second, and the whispers became a cacophony, overlapping voices all saying the same thing. Fix it. Fix it. I needed a plan, but the fear was paralyzing. My hands were trembling as I looked back at the freezer. This was no ordinary repair job. Whatever was happening, it wasn't natural. The freezer's hum had turned into a low rumble, a sound that resonated deep within my chest, like the growl of an animal circling its prey. The frost continued to creep outward, winding through the aisles like skeletal fingers. Every rule I'd read so far rang in my head like a warning siren, and the whispering voices seemed to be growing louder, echoing off the store's sterile walls. Fix it, they chanted again, insistent and unyielding. I approached the freezer, my hands trembling as I reached out toward the glass door. The frost had thickened, obscuring the contents within. The spirals on the glass had stopped moving, now forming a singular word at the center. Now. The screwdriver was still in my pocket, its rusted edges warm against my palm when I grasped it. I hesitated. The thought of touching the freezer again sent a shiver down my spine. But I couldn't ignore the rules, not after what I'd seen. If there was one thing I had learned, it was that disobeying the rules wasn't an option. I inhaled sharply and pressed the tip of the screwdriver against the edge of the freezer door. As the metal made contact, a sharp ping echoed through the air, and the frost recoiled slightly, as though it were alive and retreating from the tool's touch. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned in closer, trying to see through the thick frost inside. Then, the door moved, not from my hand, but from within. Something on the other side pushed against it, the faint outline of fingers pressing against the frosted glass. My stomach turned as I realized the fingers weren't human. They were too long, too angular. My grip tightened on the screwdriver as the door shook under the weight of whatever was trapped inside. "Don't let it out," the whispering voices said in unison, louder this time. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the tool. My heart raced as I remembered Rule 3. If the freezer door moves, hold it closed until it stops. I couldn't. The very idea of pressing my hand against that trembling door sent waves of panic through me. But the frost continued to creep toward my boots, the air growing colder with every second I hesitated. I had no choice. I dropped to my knees and shoved the screwdriver into the gap between the door and the frame, wedging it shut. The rumbling intensified, the sound now accompanied by a deep, guttural growl that seemed to come from within the freezer. I pressed all my weight against the door, my knees digging into the frozen tiles as I struggled to hold it closed. The growl turned into a roar, and the frost surged upward, climbing the walls like ivy. The fluorescent lights flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows that danced across the aisles. My teeth chattered as the temperature plummeted, the air so cold it burned my lungs. "Tom," the voices called again, louder now, their tone almost mocking. I shut my eyes and focused on holding the door. My arms ached, and my breath came in short gasps, but I couldn't let go. Not now. Not when the rules were the only thing keeping me from becoming a part of whatever nightmare was unfolding in this cursed store. Suddenly, the freezer fell silent. The door stopped shaking, and the frost began to recede, retreating back toward the glass like water flowing backward. I collapsed onto the floor, my hands numb and my heart pounding in my ears. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, and then I heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from inside the freezer, followed by a single chilling word whispered in a voice that wasn't my own. Almost. I leaned against a shelf, trying to catch my breath. My fingers felt stiff, almost frozen, as if the cold had seeped into my very bones. The faint scratching sound from the freezer continued, an incessant reminder that whatever I had just contained wasn't gone. It was waiting. For a fleeting moment, I debated leaving, just walking out of the store, abandoning my tools, my job, and whatever cursed history this place held. But something about the rules, the freezer, and the voices felt like they were all tied to me now, as though stepping away would only worsen my fate. So, against every instinct screaming at me to run, I moved toward the office. The manager's desk was a chaotic mess of invoices, discarded pens, and half-filled coffee cups. But among the clutter was a metal filing cabinet, the kind that seemed older than the store itself. Its top drawer was slightly ajar, revealing a manila folder labeled Incident Records. My fingers hesitated over the folder, a sinking feeling settling in my chest. I opened it. The first document was a faded typewritten report from the late 1980s, detailing an armed robbery that had occurred at this very Dollar General. According to the report, 2 men had stormed into the store during closing hours. The cashier, a young man named Ray, had been forced to empty the register at gunpoint. But things had gone wrong, terribly wrong. The robbers had decided Ray knew too much. They'd taken him to the back of the store, forcing him to open the freezer. The report stated that Ray's body was later discovered inside, frozen solid, with his hand still clutching a bundle of cash. The robbers? They disappeared without a trace. My throat went dry as I read on. The next report, dated 2 years later, described another incident. This time, it was a maintenance worker repairing the same freezer. He'd gone missing during his shift, and the store had closed for a week following his disappearance. The last page of the folder contained a single note written in jagged handwriting. "The freezer holds their sins." The air seemed to grow heavier around me, the cold from the freezer seeping into the office. I flipped the folder closed and stared at the locked drawer beneath it. Something in my gut told me the key to all of this, to understanding what was happening, lay in that drawer. I found the key in the manager's top desk drawer, buried beneath a stack of receipts. With a deep breath, I unlocked the cabinet. Inside, there was a single item. An old rusted photograph, its edges curling with age. The image was black and white, depicting the store as it had been decades ago. In the background, the freezer stood prominently, its pristine surface unmarred by time. But it wasn't the freezer that drew my attention. It was the people. 2 men stood in front of it, their faces obscured by shadows. And there, at their feet, was a figure slumped on the floor, frozen in place. I turned the photograph over and my heart skipped a beat at the scrawled words on the back. They never left. The freezer let out a low hum, almost a growl, as if it knew I was uncovering its secrets. My head snapped up, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement in the photograph, those shadowy figures shifting ever so slightly. Then came the voices again, louder this time, almost accusatory. "Fix it, Tom, or join them." The voices continued to echo through the store, growing louder and more insistent. I clutched the photograph in my trembling hands, staring at the frozen scene that now seemed alive. The shadowy figures appeared to lean forward, their obscured faces tilting as though watching me. A chill ran down my spine, deeper than the physical cold emanating from the freezer. My body moved on autopilot, driven by a mix of fear and compulsion. I had to confront it, whatever it was. I stepped out of the office and back into the main store, the fluorescent lights flickering like a broken pulse. The freezer door was slightly ajar, and frost crept outward, snaking along the tiles like icy fingers reaching for prey. The screwdriver was still in my pocket, the rusted edges biting into my thigh. I pulled it out, gripping it tightly. The rules flashed in my mind like a warning beacon. Do not use your bare hands to touch the freezer. My breath came out in foggy clouds as I approached. The temperature had dropped even further, and every step felt like I was wading through snowdrifts. As I neared the freezer, I could see my reflection in the pooling frost on the floor. It wasn't just me staring back, though. Behind me, shadowy outlines shifted, blending into the dim aisles. My heart raced, but I didn't turn around. I knew I wouldn't see anything if I looked directly. They thrived in the edges of perception. The freezer groaned as I reached for the handle with the screwdriver. The sound was guttural, almost organic, as though the appliance itself was alive. I wedged the screwdriver into the edge of the door and pried it open. Cold mist spilled out, engulfing me, and for a moment, I thought I heard someone whisper my name. Inside, the frost-covered shelves were empty except for one object, an old leather wallet, its surface cracked and worn. It was out of place, sitting there as if waiting for me. I hesitated but remembered the rule. Take what doesn't belong and place it where it should. Using the screwdriver, I nudged the wallet onto the floor. The moment it hit the tiles, the frost recoiled, retreating like a living thing burned by light. The air warmed slightly, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I had done it. I had followed the rules and survived. But then the lights went out. Darkness consumed the store, broken only by the faint glow of the freezer. The voices returned, no longer whispers but guttural cries, a cacophony of rage and despair. I backed away, clutching the screwdriver like a weapon. My foot hit something solid, and I turned to see one of the mannequins from the front display. It wasn't where I'd left it earlier, and its blank face seemed to tilt toward me accusingly. The lights flickered back on, and the mannequin was gone. The freezer door slammed shut with a deafening clang, and the frost began to spread again, faster this time, consuming the floor and shelves in a tide of white. I ran. I didn't think, didn't breathe, just sprinted for the exit. The aisles blurred around me, the shadows chasing me with every step. I reached the door and slammed into it, throwing it open and stumbling into the warm night air. The cold still clung to me, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I turned back to the store. Through the glass, I could see the freezer, the frost now covering it entirely. The shadows inside shifted, watching, waiting. I didn't stop running until I was 3 blocks away from the store. My legs burned, and my chest ached with every breath, but the freezing air inside me wouldn't let go. I collapsed onto a bench beneath a dim streetlight, clutching the rusted screwdriver like it was the only tether to reality. The night was eerily silent. Even the hum of distant cars seemed muted, as if the world had shrunk to just me and the looming shadow of the Dollar General behind me. My thoughts raced, replaying every moment of the night, trying to make sense of the impossible. The frost, the voices, the shadows, they weren't just some trick of the mind. They were real, and they were tied to that freezer. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the wallet I had knocked to the floor earlier. The leather was still ice cold, sending a shiver through my fingers. I hesitated, but curiosity and a gnawing sense of obligation won out. Opening it, I found faded bills and a cracked driver's license. The face staring back at me was unfamiliar, an older man with deep-set eyes and a weary expression. The name read, Harold Price. Suddenly, it clicked. Harold Price was the name I'd seen etched into the freezer door earlier, half hidden beneath the frost. My hands trembled as I flipped through the rest of the wallet. There was a note tucked inside, its edges brittle and yellowed with age. Written in jagged handwriting, it read, "To whoever finds this, I'm sorry. I broke the rules, and now I'm paying the price. The freezer, it keeps us here, keeps us cold. If you're reading this, you're part of it now. Don't fight it. It won't let you go." My stomach churned. The meaning was clear. Harold had been trapped by the freezer, just as the mannequins in the store seemed to be the remnants of others who had failed to follow the rules. I wanted to throw the wallet away, to fling it into the gutter and forget it ever existed, but a part of me knew it wouldn't change anything. The frost wasn't just in the store anymore. I could feel it crawling beneath my skin, a coldness that no amount of warmth could chase away. My breath fogged the night air, even as the summer heat pressed down on me. I looked back toward the Dollar General, its dark silhouette standing against the faint glow of streetlights. For a moment, I thought I saw movement through the glass doors, something pale and humanoid shifting behind the aisles. And then the lights inside flickered on, one by one, as if beckoning me back. I stood, the screwdriver still clutched in my hand. My instincts screamed to run, to keep moving until the store was a distant memory, but I knew better. The frost wouldn't let me go. Harold's note made that clear. As I turned to leave, I noticed my reflection in a nearby storefront window. My face looked gaunt, my eyes hollow, as if the frost had already claimed part of me. But there was something else. Behind my reflection, in the darkened glass, a figure stood. It was me. Or at least, it looked like me, down to the screwdriver in its hand and the frost creeping up its neck. Its lips moved, though no sound came out, and I realized with dawning horror that it was mouthing one word: stay. The frost was alive. It had claimed Harold, and now it was reaching for me. I walked away that night, but deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before I'd have to go back. The rules were clear.